Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you, everybody who has continued to tune in. The podcast continues to grow and the guests keep getting better and better and better. Today's guest, I am super excited to have on board. She was a personal recommendation, a friend of a friend, Hilary Sheinbaum. She's an independent journalist and the author of The Dry Challenge, How to Lose the Booze for Dry January, Sober October, and any other alcohol-free month. A judgment-free guide to giving up alcohol for a month-long period. Hilary is a prominent figure in the sober, curious, non-alcoholic beverage space. She's an advocate for dry months and exploring fun, new, and different ways to live a happy, adventurous, big life. Already in 2023, she has been featured extensively in news articles and on broadcast segments, including Market Watch's piece, Non-Alcoholic Options on St. Patrick's Day, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Good Morning America, New York One. I can go on and on and on. Hilary, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. I'm really excited to chat as well. I've been following you along before Victoria made the recommendation to bring you onto the show. So I'm really grateful that she connected us because I feel that your topic is a topic that's just continuing to increase with popularity day over day. And, you know, on the surface, it could seem trendy. But a lot of times when you peel the layers behind this overall theme and why perhaps people are taking a step back from drinking, regardless of what their personal objectives are, it seems to be that it's a lot deeper than just a dry January exercise now. So maybe let me start off by asking you, how did this all get started?
Oh, it was an accident.
I love that.
I know. What's crazy is I think about maybe what my life would be like hadn't it happened, but who knows? So to give you some background, I used to be a red carpet reporter by night, and I was a wine, beer, and cocktail journalist by day. So my nightly events would start at 5 p.m. for check-in, 6:30 for red carpet, an event at like 7 or 8, and then an after party starting at like 10 o'clock. And at these events, there were always top shelf liquor, overflowing champagne flutes. And I didn't drink every night, but certainly, drinking on the job wasn't a no-no. So, and then I would wake up the next morning and I would report about cocktail trends and, interview bartenders and write about restaurants as well for USA Today and AM New York. So also living in the city and being a single 20-something, I was, going to parties and dates and all the fun things that New York has to offer. So alcohol was abundant. And this is where the accident happens. So I go to dinner with a friend and we catch up. He asks me if I have any New Year's resolutions because it's the last week of December and this is in 2016. And I told him I didn't. And he brought up this thing called Dry January, which I purposefully just ignored. I changed the subject. I thought it was silly given everything I just told you and how my lifestyle was. And lo and behold, a week later on New Year's Eve, I had a glass of champagne in one hand and my cell phone in the other. And I tipsy texted him and I said, "Do you want to make a bet?" And so with my buzz, I proposed that we do a dry January and the person who lost would buy the winner dinner anywhere in New York City. So the stakes were very high because New York is expensive and it can really, really go up in price depending on where you're dining. And that's really how it started because I proposed a silly bet and I had a great friend who agreed to it.
And how did the bet play out?
Well, it went great for me. I did 31 days without any booze. I'll tell you how I felt afterwards. But for my friend Alejandro, he spent a hefty price paying for dinner at Momofuku Co. So to this day, he will not bet me anything ever again. And I went through my month. By day 10, I was sleeping better. I had clearer skin. I felt like my mood was elevated. And typically during a month like January, it's gloomy, it's nasty and wet in the city. There's not a ton of fun things going on. So, um, yeah, it changed my perspective for that month, and really for almost past 8 years now, which I've continued to do a dry January every year, and another a number of sober months in between. So it's really evolved, and yeah, and then I wrote a book about it. So that's how it started.
I love that. I mean, I mentioned this on a podcast episode previously, but I've been 9 months dry right now. I decided in January I was going to do a dry January. And then in January, I found out I was running the Boston Marathon this year. So I said to myself, let me take a couple months off until April. Why not stay dry while I'm training? It's probably better for training purposes anyway, and recovery and hydration purposes. And it was right around that time where I had Michael Chernow on the podcast. And he talked about his story and the obstacles that he overcame as an alcoholic, as a drug addict, and how his life turned around, once he went sober. And, I was really bought into the fact that his sobriety really meshed well with his desire to be just an overall high performer. And so I was allured by that. And I decided, let me just see. Could I actually cut the booze and let me figure out how this is going to impact me on a day-to-day basis? Spoiler alert, I didn't wake up with a six-pack the next day, and I still don't have a six-pack. But from a mental clarity perspective, and just the fact that I feel like I could be more mentally present, and my mind is just more awake, and from a recovery perspective, I just feel tremendously better at that point. I could definitely speak firsthand to the impact of just laying off the booze for a little bit. And by no means am I sitting out there, on my high horse preaching and telling anybody what to do. But I do think it's just such an important topic, and one that for a while was a little bit taboo. And so I want to get into now what led you to putting pen to paper.
Yeah, well, I think it's still taboo in certain, cities and parts of the world, and cultures, and even families, right? Because we use booze as a way, and I say we as in like the general population, to relax and unwind and bond with each other, and we use it in some religious contexts, And so for me, I wrote this piece, and it was really about how my skin improved, and which seems very superficial. But as somebody who works in multiple industries, including beauty, and is sometimes on camera, it definitely affected the, the dullness factor was not there, and my skin was more hydrated, and it was just a healthier thing. So that was the first thing I did, and that was, I think, that published in 2018. So when it came to writing my book, it was really, I almost want to say it was easy. Like writing a book, typically, I think people might struggle with, depending on, what their regular jobs are. But for me, because I'm a full-time writer, it came very naturally. And it was all the things that people were asking me on a regular basis. And it was really the guide that I probably could have benefited from. On that, first day, January 1st, 2017, when I had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into.
You sent me a copy and I started reading. But I want you to sum it up for the audience here with regards to some of the key takeaways that you talk about in the book, and, essentially how you pitch it to your audience.
Yeah. So it's a non-judgmental guide to giving up alcohol for a month, whether that is a dry January or a sober October. And it highlights how to do it, but really it pinpoints, having a friend do it with you is a really important thing. It definitely helped me. It has mocktail recipes. It has ideas for other activities. Talks about how to date without alcohol, because that's such a big part of finding your person, especially in a big city like New York, and really just how to socialize and how to relax and have a great time in a big life that's full of, adventure and fun without the company of booze.
Let's talk about dating without alcohol. I want to pinpoint on that topic really quick. And I want to get your take. You're the resident expert here. What do you have to say about the subject, and how do you approach it?
Yeah. So I'm currently in a relationship. And when we first started dating, we shared a January together, right? We were just getting to know each other. I was giving up alcohol and he was not really. He definitely was respectful of my decision, which was a big factor in why we continued dating. Because, in the past, I had gone on dates with guys during a dry January or another dry month or just a day that I wasn't drinking for whatever reason. And people, tended to be a little bit pushy or asking, kind of aggressive questions in terms of my why, which I don't mind when people ask, but certainly when, people are poking fun or they're being less understanding, it's a red flag for me. So, I definitely am a huge proponent of drinking or of dating without alcohol because I think that it really eliminates that barrier and that filter of, oh, maybe this person didn't mean what they said, or perhaps I misread, this certain cue. And I think that you can really cut through a lot of BS and see people for who they are, and also bond over activities that you really enjoy doing, whether or not you are, imbibing or whether or not you're looking for your soulmate. So I definitely recommend it, especially if you're on the fence about someone and you're not sure if there's a spark there. I would highly suggest doing an activity that you love to do on your own, and bringing them into the fold.
What have you learned about your own relationship with alcohol while doing this? I speak for myself over the last couple of months. I've learned things that I didn't expect to learn, to be honest, about my relationship with alcohol. And, for context, I wasn't a heavy drinker. My wife and I just had a baby last month. So it wasn't last year, excuse me. So I wasn't like going out frequently. And I think even with coffee, I have this thing where I just like something in my hand, in the morning. And I think it was like coffee in the morning and then a beer, or a glass of wine at night. And it was just being accustomed to something, in my hand and it was that motion. And over the last couple of months, I just kind of learned about myself and kind of like how I could be in control of some of the things that at one point I thought were just customary. Is there anything that you have specifically learned about yourself, as you've been doing your sober months or really throughout this entire journey?
Absolutely. I think there's so much. For one, I was always a social drinker. So I wasn't drinking at home, but what I realized was the people around me in the conversation and also how much I was enjoying that conversation or not enjoying it when, I gave up alcohol for a period of time. I realized, that the people around me who would still be around me if I wasn't drinking or we were doing something else were still there. And some of them, fell off and for, a variety of reasons. But I feel like if drinking is the thing that bonds you together, sometimes you need to find another activity, or maybe sometimes you need to find another social scene. So that was one thing. I think for me, the biggest thing was I didn't realize what impacted me until it was gone. Right. So I think that, and I make this comparison pretty frequently. Obviously, there are people who, need to go gluten free. They need to give up dairy. They need to, eliminate certain things in their diet. And I found that more often than not, and I'm not a doctor by any means, more often than not, though, when, I had a friend nursing a hangover and they were telling me that they didn't feel good a day later, or they were tired or feeling lethargic, their resolution was that they were going to cut out, an ingredient in their regular day-to-day life, which might have been the culprit. But my suggestion was always just cut out alcohol for like a week and just see how you feel. Just try it. And the pushback was pretty strong. Oh, it's not the vodka, it's not the tequila, it's the ice cream, and it might be, but I'm a big fan of ice cream, so I will defend it to its death. But Yeah, I just found that a big learning lesson for me was that without alcohol, how differently I felt, and in a positive way.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point about friendships. And, one of the things that I've learned over the last year is the fact that I'm still doing the same things that I was doing before, right? Like 95% of my friends are drinking actively, but I'm still hanging out. Like I was out in Montauk all summer doing the same exact things I was doing the previous summers. I was just feeling a lot better
Yeah.
doing them. And that's one of the things that I really want the audience to take away from all this is the fact that you can still do a lot of the things that you're doing, still be in the same places, still carry on those conversations, still enjoy yourself. And it's one of those things where it might be a little bit of an adjustment at first. But once you get past that early stage, it just continues to get easier and easier and easier. And so I kind of want to make sure that I dispel a little bit of that fear, because I'll be honest, I had that fear. At one point it was like, well, who am I going to hang out with? Who's going to want to hang out with me? And what are we going to do? And to your point about dating, my wife and I, when we were together dating, yeah, we were out a lot and drinking a good amount. And she still likes me, so that's good. But yeah, I mean, like you really are in control of it. And I want to make sure the audience knows about that. I want to pivot a little bit, and we talked a lot about what you've been doing and what, the world sees from you in terms of the material and the platform that you've built. But let's get to know Hilary a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your personal background.
Yeah. So I was born in New York. I grew up in South Florida in the greater Fort Lauderdale area, in a town called Coral Springs. I actually went to two high schools and then I went to two colleges. So I started at Florida State and transferred to the University of Florida. And I like to joke that I'm
You were a
basically
Seminole and a Gator.
yeah. They're bitter rivals. If you are
Yeah.
a football fan or you're not from the state of Florida, you might not understand, but they are probably one of the biggest rivals out there.
Yeah.
And they're about a 2.5 hour drive from each other. So yeah, that was interesting for sure. I always say, during football season, I just want them to have fun. I root for both teams.
You want both teams to win. You're one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They only play each other around Thanksgiving every year. So the rest of the year, I can actually cheer for both. And yeah, I joke that I am the same person as I was in high school and college, because in high school, I ran cross country. In college and in high school, I was the editor of my yearbook. And in college, I contributed to both of the school papers, 2 years and 2 years. So I still am a writer, and now I'm training for a marathon. So it's been interesting, but I moved to New York after college, and I spent 5 years on the red carpet as a reporter interviewing celebrities, and I've contributed to a lot of other publications since. So the New York Times, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. And I cover a variety of topics ranging from food and beverage to weddings, and health and lifestyle and more. So that's a little bit about me.
I was going to bring up the marathon, so I'm glad that you brought it up. She's running New York this year, so we'll see her out there. The industry that you chose, like you said, there's a lot going on in that industry, right? And like you're exposed to a lot. You probably have to be moving at a rapid pace all the time. Clearly, it kind of laid a foundation for you in terms of the platform, the book, and the messaging that you're throwing out there. Why did you even get into journalism to begin with?
I'm really bad at math. I'm not kidding, but I think early on I realized that writing came much easier to me than algebra. And I enjoyed it, and I really like to read, and I like to learn, and I like to ask questions. And so that was always, part of my interests. And I think since 8th grade, I wanted to write a book. So it's like I said, I feel like there's a part of me that is just still the same. But yeah, it's definitely, helped me in the sense of of getting to talk to more people about this movement, and it's certainly helped me, craft the message, because I think until recently, a lot of people viewed sobriety as a very black and white issue, and now I think people are coming to realize that there is an in between. Um, Also, you don't have to identify yourself as somebody who never drinks or is sober, or there is, a little bit of a difference between people who are sober curious and maybe sober-ish because perhaps they use other substances. So, yeah, it's an ever-evolving movement and topic, but I think that thankfully, using words to really get the point across is very important.
Hey all, it's me, Bishoy. As a marathon runner and endurance athlete, I've come to understand the importance of properly fueling your body for preparation and recovery. Every day, you get a shot at success. How you start your day typically paints a picture of what the rest of the day will look like. Start your day with a super convenient, healthy, and delicious nutritional win. Meal 1 by Creatures of Habit. Overnight oatmeal packed with 30 grams of plant-based protein, chia, flax, and pumpkin seeds. Vitamin D3, omega-3s, a probiotic, and digestive enzymes, made in under 1 minute. Stop wasting time or worrying about what to eat as your first meal of the day. Start with meal 1. Visit creaturesofhabit.com, creatures spelled with a K, and use code MILE40 for 15% off a one-time purchase or the first subscription order payment. What's interesting to me about all this is a lot of times you see writers who talk about these topics or people who are outspoken about these topics are generally coming from a moment of bottoming out related to those topics. And in your case, that doesn't seem to be the situation, right? Like you don't talk about having a horrible relationship with alcohol or alcohol abuse being part of your past or anything like that. Yet it is so front and center for you and something that took on a life of its own. And I think that's something that's really interesting and in a positive way, because I think it kind of makes your perspective really even keeled, right? Like you didn't have a problem that unless there's one that you didn't share, but you didn't have a problem. You just identified something that, maybe we weren't speaking about as a society, and you brought it to the forefront. And I think that's really unique, and that's really, really special. But as you know, Mile 40 is all about talking about those moments where we bottom out. And so if it wasn't going to be about alcohol, let's talk about, something along the way and along your journey that was perhaps a teaching point for you.
Yeah. I mean, I actually do feel, though, I have to say, I mean, I can tell you about a lot of things where I bottomed out, but in terms of alcohol, I think that just having the consistent, terrible sleep, feeling burnt out, feeling exhausted all of the time, not reaching my full potential, but also not even recognizing what that is, because I was trying my hardest, doing my best, still drinking and just operating on this hamster wheel, that until I pulled back without alcohol, that there wasn't that clarity. Right. So, yeah, I don't know if that's it, but I will say that I think there was a time that I was let go from. So before let me set the scene. I graduated from the University of Florida, and it was 2010. So nobody's hiring. It's a really, terrible landscape out there in terms of getting a job. I really wanted to get an editorial job. My dream was to be the editor-in-chief of Teen People or People magazine. I wanted to interview celebrities. I applied for a job on a website, and it was actually to be a stringer for Us Weekly. And so I had the pleasure of interviewing the cast of The Jersey Shore.
I love that.
I spent 2 days in Miami with Snooki and The Situation, both at their house in Miami and at a nightclub. I remember it was yesterday. Vinny was telling me he was going to go back to law school. And it really was, it was such a high, right? Like, this is exactly what I wanted to do. I loved celebrity gossip. I was on Perez Hilton all day in college. And then I knew I wanted to move to New York. So I had applied to jobs. I wasn't getting any feedback. And I even moved to New York temporarily with family on Long Island. And I I was starting to apply to PR jobs, which eventually I did work in PR for about a year and a half. But I remember telling my parents I had this one interview, right? And it was with a global PR firm. They're still like one of the biggest and one of the best.
Sure.
And I went to the interview. I was obsessed with this job. I was so excited. And I told my parents, like, I will move back to Florida if I don't get the job. I didn't get the job. I didn't move back to Florida. It was like a completely, poker face lie. But that's not even me bottoming out. What happened was I actually ended up getting another job in PR, and I worked, and I actually was part of a boutique firm that is it's very good. It's probably one of like the best. It's actually how I met Victoria. And I was let go from that job, and I was devastated. I, had kind of built now this resume of being a publicist, and it was part of my identity. And I had so many friends, in the office, and I just felt like, what am I going to do with my life? And I was very young too. So I think also giving that perspective helps, because I didn't know anything else. And I was pretty depressed about it. I was very upset, very anxious, very, I felt like a failure. Somebody who for me, I had, played sports all my life. I was very ambitious. I was very, much, one of those kids who was like in gifted classes, the type. So like very type A, always, kind of achieving the best of the best. And to be told like, this is not for you was such a setback for me. I think ultimately, what ended up happening is, after not working for probably a few months, and my parents telling me that, the day that I am not able to pay for my rent, I need to come home, is when I was very lucky enough to get my next job in doing celebrity red carpets, which essentially has set me on this path, right? For the past 11 years. But I do remember it like so vividly, just feeling like I had lost like a part of me. And it wasn't something, as devastating as now I realize, like it probably wasn't, it was actually the best thing that happened. But at the time it was the worst thing in the world. I think that also, as far as social media goes, when people see how glamorous things are and how well you're doing, and then you have to explain to somebody that it's no longer happening, I think is one of those things that it is very, I don't know, it was embarrassing at the time, very hurtful on my soul. So that was definitely a big one.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times those inflection points are inflection points, right? Like, they are moments where, you think you're at your worst, and then, over time that next opportunity comes along and you realize like what you were shaping yourself up for. And when you look at where you were then and where you are today, and one of the things that I know about you that perhaps someone on the outside doesn't know is the fact that you are building out your entire platform on your own. All those press appearances, all those features are being done by you. And if it wasn't for your experience, probably working in the industry, building your relationships, being able to understand, what they're looking for, then I don't know that you would have accomplished, a percentage of the success that you've seen today off your platform. And so I think that, it's really important to kind of dig into that inflection point and realize, what it did for you. And side note, you talk about, being really into celebrity gossip. One of my lifelong dreams is to make it into the citing section on page 6. So at some point, I'm just throwing this out there in the universe. I know you're part of that world. At some point, I hope to see my name in the citing section for anyone out there listening.
A good way.
Yeah, in a good way, in a good way,
Yeah.
for sure, in a good way. Yeah, something about like how like top performing podcasters, spotted out at the surf lodge like in the summer, hanging out with blah blah blah. We'll
With the
see.
Kardashians? No.
Yeah, yeah. Speak it into existence, right?
Yeah, yeah, I believe in it, and we'll wordsmith it a bit, but I think we got something here.
No, for sure. I love this story because it really does come full circle, right? Like people at the surface may not know where all this came from. And a lot of times people just see the highlights, right? Social media is a highlight reel and they see the features and they see the appearances, they see the news articles. They think to themselves, like, how did this happen? And probably assuming, oh my God, she must have had some sort of crazy story with alcohol. But what I love about this is, as I said earlier, you really are coming at it from a perspective that's truly, even keeled and one that kind of sees both sides of the coin. I want to give you the floor really quick because I want you to, think of the younger version of you for a second. And I am sure the younger version of you didn't see any of this coming. And I want you to talk to her. And, that probably represents an audience member out there about, how your path may not be as mapped out as you thought it would be, but why perhaps that's something to be grateful for.
Oh my God, so loaded, but like so important. I think, and this kind of goes back to what I was just saying about your identity. I think that especially in New York and especially in big cities, or if you're an ambitious person who has this idea of what your life is going to be like, we tend, or at least I tend, to hold on to that image or that idea. And I think that it's so important to realize that it is going to evolve, just like maybe your wardrobe would evolve. You're not going to, fit or wear the same, I guess now because it's styles coming back, but you're probably not going to wear the same thing that you did in high school. So, 10, 20 years down the road, you need to evolve as time goes on. It's not going to be an automatic switch either. And so when, these road bumps come or change is starting to take form, I think it's important to see where that goes. I think, personally, as somebody who is so in the industry of booze, I think at first it was probably a huge shock to people. And even for me and my identity as somebody who wrote about this topic and was so familiar with people in the industry, to explain myself in a way that made the most sense for me, but also conveyed to them like what I was doing, took a little bit of practice. But I really do think it's an identity thing, because even, for so long to identify as somebody who is, going out and on the scene and doing all these cool things, and then to kind of, take a step back, it is a huge mind shift. There's really no other way to explain it. I think it changes, sometimes your social circle. It definitely can change your livelihood, like it did for me, because suddenly I didn't have these standard topics to write about anymore. But I think it's a really big opportunity to explore what else is out there and what's new. And perhaps it is, being part of a new category, which is really exciting, really scary, and also takes a lot of work. So I just gave you a mouthful, but I feel like I hope I answered your question.
You did.
I think it's just being aware that, things are going to change, and that what is happening now is not going to necessarily be the thing 10 years from now, or even 5, or even 2.
I love it. Hilary, where can people find you and where can they pick up a copy of the book?
Okay, so they can find me on Instagram at Hilary, Hilary, writes NY. They can also pick up the book at Target stores, Strand Bookstore in Union Square, Amazon.com. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure having you on. I am so proud of the platform that you've built. I'm so really proud of the example that you're setting for a lot of people out there in terms of taking life into their own hands. Like you said, right? Like this didn't happen on purpose. And you turned it into something off a bet. You got a really good dinner out of it. And yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that, you didn't know this back then, but you probably embrace it now as being a purpose, a calling, and something that really propels you forward. So really appreciate the context and grateful that you came on today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
You got it.